very first Ask the Expert, brought to you by TTS. We're really excited to be here today. It's a project that's been in the pipeline for quite a while, and we really want to make sure that we give teachers the support and that you get what you need, and you get the opportunity to ask the questions that you want, and you can really get hold of the information that will help you to be the best that you can be. Our topic today is the new Ofsted Framework, and we're incredibly lucky to have Sean Harford, the National Director for Education for Ofsted. Welcome. And we've got Nicola Wileman, head teacher at Hillsborough Primary School in Sheffield, and you've been through a pilot inspection, haven't you? So definitely expert in what we're about to talk about. Shall we start off just with a bit of an overview of the new framework and a bit of a rationale why the changes? What are Ofsted hoping to achieve with it?
Yeah, of course, and thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here with Nicola. What we found from our research when we on the lead up and the development work for the framework was we particularly wanted to focus in on the curriculum, because we think that over time we've taken our eyes off that particular ball. Obviously maths and English were very, very important, and schools focusing on that, because if you go back 30 years, children were not having the knowledge and skills they have nowadays in English and maths as a result of that focus. But a number of things came out that over time, because of the tests really at the end of Key Stage 2, particularly in primary, if we sort of focus on primary for a minute, that schools are focusing very much on those, because our inspectors looked at those, they're published yearly, and over time those two things started to come into probably too much alignment. We then wanted to say, well, okay, so what's happening then? Let's have a look at the curriculum more widely. And what we found in that research was that quite a high proportion of particularly primary schools were indeed focusing just on English and maths, and that especially in upper Key Stage 2. And therefore, the broader curriculum, the broader subjects weren't getting much of a look in. So what we needed to do was say, well, how can we accept our part of that happened over that period. We've got to do something about that to incentivise schools to look more broadly at the curriculum. And so the new framework was set about, and we were really grateful to schools like Nicola's that put their hands up to, and we didn't twist it too much.
No, not too much.
to say that they would help us with that work. And what we did was sent out inspectors over that last year with research criteria. So if you go back to the research document we published, you can see that the research across the whole of education was kind of drawn together by a research team. That then put in place criteria that our inspectors went in and tested and worked with schools to test out. And then that then led to the handbook, and then we went on from there piloting. And so, to summarise, looking at the curriculum, making sure that schools are really thinking about that as the engine room of the school, the real substance of education. That's the kind of drive for the new framework, really.
Okay, brilliant. And would you say that that's it was geared in primary school towards maths and English? I mean, you are a primary school teacher. You used to be.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? Because I think we thought we were doing the right thing and really focusing on maths and English. And yes, we were doing the other subjects as well, but maybe not in as much detail, in as much depth, with as much rigour, I suppose, as there was in maths and English. And I was saying to Sean before we started, it's just been nice to have that time to go back and look, not to throw everything out, but to look again and make sure, is this right for our children? Are we really giving them the very best, the highest quality of education we possibly can?
And I think that's an important point that you were all speaking about before, is that it's not a case of throwing everything out and starting again.
No,
is it? And that's an important point.
But I think going back to the point about were schools doing the right thing, the government at the time put an absolute focus through the numeracy and literacy strategies on those two things. It was obvious that schools were going to do that, and rightly at that point. But I think things have got so much better in those areas that we now need to bag those gains and then look to see, so how do we make it even better? And the next step on that journey, I believe, and we believe from the research, is that it's making children see the broader curriculum, learn all those things across it. That actually helps, as you were saying before, helps them with their English and maths anyway.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's the idea of just continual development and improvement,
Yeah,
isn't it?
sure.
In all aspects. Well, I'd just like to say thanks to our followers on Facebook and Twitter for sending in a variety of brilliant questions. We're going to get through as many as we can today. One of the first ones, and one that I thought was particularly interesting, was on a practical level in the classroom then. What would you say are the main changes that teachers or practitioners are going to see in the Ofsted inspection?
Yeah, I mean, if we go back 4 years, we stopped grading individual lessons 4 years ago, but people didn't really think we had, because we were going into lessons still for kind of 20 minutes, half an hour.
Yeah.
We would go to a range of different lessons. We would feedback those individual teachers about their performance, if you like, not in a graded way, but in terms of strengths and areas for improvement. But the unit, if you like, of responsibility, the unit of focus rather, was actually the single lesson. I think the biggest change people will see in the new framework is that actually we're not looking at that unit as the unit of focus. We're looking at it across over time, from the kind of the way the curriculum is planned out, the way it's sequenced, so that when I go into a lesson, for example, and I sit down with a teacher or talk to the children, what I'll be talking about is, well, what's going on here, but in the context of what's been planned, and the work they're doing, and I'll talk to the children about exactly that work they're doing, how that fits in with the recent lessons they've been doing. Talk to the teacher about that as well. And we're also not feeding back individually to teachers. We want to do that more if we can on a group of teachers. I mean, going to secondary now, you might, I'll be a scientist, I might go into the science department, and at the part of the day we'll be sitting down with the whole department, if possible, to talk about what I'd see, what the curriculum is looking like. So it's that kind of approach, which is more a kind of a team approach than you being put on the spot.
I think I would echo that in the sense of, from our experience of the pilot inspection, I think teachers were expecting them to be, well, that lesson, was effective or whatever. But actually it became more about a conversation about education between a whole range of people and in groups, in larger numbers, conversations with me on my own, conversations with pupils, and it felt very much more like we were talking about education as a whole and not pinpointing individual strengths and weaknesses, which for my staff felt more comfortable. So they didn't come out with some feeling elated because they'd done a really good lesson for Ofsted, and some feeling like, oh, I've been picked apart a little bit in the nicest of ways, but picked apart a bit, and we have to then pick them up a little bit off the floor. So it just became more, we're all talking about learning, staff, pupils, senior leadership team, and visitors that are in today. So it was much.
Sounds more like almost like staff development as well. So it's almost CPD.
Yeah.
And so everyone's getting benefit out of it.
And what about the data side of it? Because I know schools previously it's been very data driven. How's that going to change?
Well, clearly, we're still interested in the outcomes in tests and examinations. You'd expect that. I mean, particularly at the end of Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5, those exam results, the qualifications are the youngsters' passport to their next level. So no one's saying that's not important. But what we are saying is that, we, in terms of looking at data, we will only look at that which is published. So we're not going to look at any of the assessment data that schools produce, any of the kind of target setting work or anything like that, because actually, and that's not to say that data is a bad thing. Schools can use it really well. The point at which it becomes less useful, though, is if someone's looking over your shoulder at it, naturally it becomes a different tool.
Yeah.
So if you know that an inspector's going to look at it and question why 15 of your children are going that way rather than that way, then that's going to be a problem, and you're probably going to then think, well, if I show that to the inspector, then that's not going to be a good thing. Actually, though, the teacher who has those data wants to be able to use them and say, right, I really need to pick up on X, Y, and Z in this class so I can move them forward, or I want to pick up on, I can see I haven't taught fractions very well, or they haven't picked up fractions at that point and we can move on. If an inspector sees it, they're going to say, hang on a minute, why? So we want to take that heat out of it, and of course allied to that is the workload issue as well around collection of data.
Okay, do you want to do the next one?
Yeah, so I think one of the big things with the curriculum is the deep dives, and the discussion around the deep dives. So one of the questions we've had in is about the deep dives for small schools. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit about what the deep dives are, and then how that would impact potentially on workload for in smaller schools.
Yeah, sure.
Technical issues, so we'll go back to the deep dives. So we were just asking about the deep dives. So big new term that's come out, big new phrase. So one of the main focus of the questions that we've had are around small schools for the deep dives. But if there was some context around that for schools, and then looking at the workload, the teachers, that side of things.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't know if it was recording or, but Nicola going to talk you through how a deep dive worked in her school, in the pilot at least. But you know, it's a term. You have to come up with something to describe a process, and that's what we come. I've seen it come up with some ridicule in the last couple of days. That's fine. I'm used to that. But the point of it is actually just in the old style of inspection, you would kind of randomly look at different lessons, and you might in a secondary you would certainly look at go and maybe do 2 or 3 different departments as an inspection. You'd skim across those. In primary you'd skim across maybe key stage 2, but it was skimming, and it was kind of randomly. You weren't sure until you went into the lesson what you might see in terms of where that sat in the curriculum. The idea of the deep dive is to actually go quite in a kind of forensic way into a subject and kind of cut a slice down through the school. So you look at different year groups and therefore and also look at the plans and the sequencing of the curriculum, talk to the head of department or the subject leader, and in so doing, once you're then into lessons, then you've got the context of it. But how did it feel for you?
Yeah, I mean, we felt that the deep dives were actually quite effective, and how they were run. So we had 3 inspectors for 2 days, and basically on the first day they looked at different things. Now we could select 2 of the subjects that we wanted them to do a deep dive into. I don't know if that's still going to be the same, but it was a conversation between us and the lead inspector. But they asked to do early reading, which I don't think is going to be unusual for most schools. So they looked at that as a deep dive. They looked at a key stage 2 maths deep dive. Then they looked at a history deep dive, geography, and we asked them to look at science. So they actually did 5. Now the morning was spent on early reading and maths, and foundation stage, and then the afternoon they looked into the other 3 subjects. So they basically did 2 each. So the way it worked is they spoke to me and our senior leadership team and our wider curriculum lead very first thing on the first day they came in. And then they asked us, and the bit that I think leadership teams need to get their head around before they come is timetabling. The timetabling of it was tricky, to make sure they had the people they needed to out, and then making sure they could see other people teach.
You mean in terms of kind of for the Ofsted inspectors to get the context and speak to the people?
Yeah, because obviously what they want to do is they want to do at least 2 consecutive year groups. So they want to see 2 consecutive year groups teach the same subject, and that's as a minimum. Am I right in saying that?
It's changed a little bit.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that's what it was for the pilot. So we had to select which 2 year groups were being taught, and then make sure that wasn't the subject lead, and then make sure we got people to. So timetabling that takes a little bit of thought, but they spoke to us. They then went in to see the lessons, and then they took some books and they looked at the books, and they spoke to the subject leader as well, and the subject leader went with them into the lessons, looked at the books, spoke to the pupils, and spoke to the teachers. So that subject lead was with them throughout that deep dive, which was great experience for them. Gave them confidence, I think, in knowing what they knew about their own subjects. But that's how each of those deep dives worked. And for us, it was very effective. And yes, it highlighted some things that we needed to improve on and to an area of development, but it also gave us lots of strengths and things that we were doing. So that was the sequence, and that's basically what they did for all of those things.
So what we've done from those pilots that schools like Nicola's helped us with is to put together a document called Inspecting the Curriculum, and that's on the web, and that effectively sets out that methodology, how it'll feel more like in the inspections now. We are planning to be in a position to say, for for example, those schools that are good schools that get an inspection that says we're going to come back in the next couple of years, either because you might be improving or you might be declining, to say which subjects would be helpful for us to look at, and we'll try and do a couple of those out of the 4 or 5 or what have you. It's more difficult when you're going into schools that you're literally bringing them up the day before to say, because it's obviously what they've got on. In the primary schools, what is the art of the possible, really? And we absolutely will not expect schools to change their timetable around in terms of which subjects are being put on. And so, should inspectors ask for that, politely decline that. You are teaching the timetable, the part of the curriculum that you have on those one of the 2 days that the inspectors are in for. That's really important. But I do pick up the point from people about the small schools issue and how much of perceived pressure there is on subject leads now. And I think it is more of an issue in small schools, because typically a subject coordinator might have 2 or 3 subjects. And that's an important management point of view, from the point of view of the head teacher, to actually say, look, I'm not trying to push you away from looking at that subject, but if you look at that subject, you'll be seeing the same person for 3 deep dives, for example. And so managing and just talking that through, the inspector will then look to see other areas where that won't be the case. There have been some teething issues in the first few weeks where I think partly where head teachers thought they can't have that kind of discussion because it will look like they're trying to hide something. So, but it absolutely should be part of that phone call on that afternoon before to say, please don't do that. And so getting those kind of teething problems is out of the way. That said, with small schools, providing a curriculum, a high quality curriculum, is as important for those children in a small school as it is in a large school. And so we can't have a kind of different standard of how we do it in a small school. There are other advantages to being in a small school for children, family feel, head teacher knowing all the children much more easily, and that kind of thing. But there are practical issues, so we need to work within it. But it is not intended to disadvantage small schools in the slightest, but it is to get to the quality of education. When you put those things together, what does that tell you about the quality of education across the whole school?
Yeah, it sounds to me as well from that sort of it's almost empowering head teachers to be on this level with the inspector, rather than feeling perhaps that they are gosh.
They absolutely should do.
I definitely felt that, and from, again, we can only talk about our experience, but I definitely felt like they were coming in to do this with us rather than, to us. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And we had the very similar phone call. The phone call was very different to previous inspection phone calls. Yeah. And maybe I wasn't prepared for that. So
how was it different?
I think I was just prepared to follow a very rigid sort of script in some sense, but actually it was more about our self-evaluation, it was more about our context, it was more about just beginning to unpick some of the maybe hypotheses that the lead inspector had picked up from websites and data and things like that, previous inspections. But it was much more going through the areas of the self-evaluation, so that she got to know what our school was like and how that was actually going to be. And then there was the conversation about, well, we'd like to look at maths, key stage 2 maths, and we'd really like to look at history and geography, but is there anything you would like us to look at? Is that more convenient for you? Are they not being taught? We were asked those kind of questions, are they going to be taught over the next 2 days? If not, can you tell me what is going to be taught, and so on. So that all happened in that conversation.
And head teachers shouldn't feel alone in that. So that it's up to like a 90-minute phone call. Previously it was kind of 40-45 minutes on the nuts and bolts of the inspection. Yeah. This extra time is used to go to exactly those kind of things that you described. But what head teachers really should feel empowered to say, can we do this in 2 halves? Can we get the nuts and bolts done, for example, first, and then I want to get my deputy in with me, so we'll put it on a speakerphone and we'll do it together. That's absolutely fine to do that. Or my deputy's with me now, can we carry on through? And that's absolutely fine. So head teachers need to feel like, again, empowered to manage that in the best way for the school in that afternoon.
Yeah, and we did that. We did all the sort of self-evaluation. Then we talked through what they'd want and how that would work for both of us. then I was given some time to really go away and put a timetable together of that kind of thing, and then we picked the conversation back up again so I could just get my head around what had been asked, and then make sure we could do it. And when I went back, I said this is going to be a problem because of X, Y, and Z. So we changed again, and yeah, so it was quite flexible,
collaborative, positive experience.
You mentioned in there about the school website and the importance of the school website prior to the inspection. How important did you find that was for you within the pilot, and how important is that for inspectors to make sure everything, all the right things are on there?
I can't say there was much emphasis on it, but we were told that they looked at the website, so I took from that they found everything they needed to.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of things that we look at when our inspectors are planning, to see certain policies that statutorily are supposed to be there and that sort of thing. It's helpful to kind of orientate yourself as an inspector, you know, see what the school thinks is important, and things like that. It's not a massive thing. I mean, there are very, very few schools in the country that don't have websites now already, and everything that is asked for on the website is actually asked for by the Department for Education.
Yeah.
It's nothing we ask for. And the periodic check that we do is to give some idea that, you know, these things are actually on websites as the government expect. But it's not a huge.
I think she read from it just the context of our school, really. That's what she was reading, and those key bits of information.
Moving on then, we've had a question about cultural capital and what this should look like. The question asked specifically in EYFS, but you know, in general would also be useful. What would you say?
Well, okay, so cultural capital is being aware that children come with different experiences to school. So if you think about the EYFS, clearly schools are in the best position to know the kinds of things that their children come through being able to do and not being able to do and knowing about. There's a job for schools to do, because you know the national curriculum talks about things like, in fact they stole this from Matthew Arnold, who was one of the original Manchester inspectors, who said about the best that's been thought and said. Yeah, and the point of this is that, you know, we all come with different cultural experiences to school, and some children come with more, some come with less, some come with different. There are kind of things though in culture that help you to learn over time better. So if you think about the EYFS, the typical things there is, and I'm sure, you know, reception teachers would know this, or nursery teachers would know this, some children will come knowing nursery rhymes. They will have had nursery rhymes read to them, they'll have had singing at home, lots of different experiences like that. That kind of thing helps you with vocabulary, it helps you with your general knowledge, it helps you to kind of locate things in the world we live in. Some of them are a bit scary, obviously, but the point being that those kind of things help children to start learning. And you know, the research around the number, well, you can argue about whether it's 3 million or 300 different words, you know, that children know. The point is, every right-thinking person knows that different children come with different vocabulary and breadth. That kind of thing being built into the EYFS, for example, so that children are learning nursery rhymes, they are singing, given the opportunity to sing, they are given the opportunity to play outside together, so they cooperate and things like that. That's the kind of thing. Now, there's an argument here about where those things start to not be cultural capital. And I've seen various different debates about this, and I'm sure the people who are debating this are absolutely correct in this. But the basic issue is, children, we need to make sure that we have some idea about the kinds of things children need to help their learning as they go forward. And then that goes through into the older years as well. You know, I was in a school yesterday, and we were talking about this earlier, and they were about to do the Iliad, a children's version of the Iliad, Homer's Iliad in year 4. And I said to the school, you know, well, that's odd, that's late to be doing the Greeks. They said, no, they've already done the Greeks in year 1 and 2. So actually what they're building up their cultural capital about the knowledge of the Greeks early on, so that later on they can use that in their learning. So that's the kind of build-up of these things over time. And I know there's been a lot of argument about it, and I know that we've been our use of it, the word has been phrase has been compared with Bourdieu, etc., etc. But it's really about just understanding that children come with different experiences.
And trying to give them as many as possible.
Exactly, so that they can all go forward together, in a way that's going to help them learn.
Would you agree that was your understanding? And
Yeah, that's our understanding, and really, we've tried to build in those kind of experiences throughout our curriculum in lots of different ways, but it is also trying to make sure that that's building on knowledge and giving the children knowledge. But I was interested in Sean's answer for that. So
Good pass.
You feel like you're okay now?
Yeah, I feel like I'm
Brilliant.
So in terms of the curriculums, I think that's the big focus is curriculum. What I know the differences of some schools buying curriculums, and then a lot of schools are focusing on designing and developing their own curriculum. What have you done at your school, and also what sort of, I know in the framework it talks about developed or adopted, so it's just sort of clarifying that for schools, I think.
So our school, we have developed the curriculum. I started at school a year ago, so it gave us a good opportunity to really have a look at everything and go back to basics. But we have certainly developed it, not redesigned it, but we've very much taken the context of our school and tried to build in our school vision into our curriculum. And our school, there are lots of children where the personal development is of a high priority. So we've tried to build elements of that throughout different subjects, if you want to go back to a subject-based, but we still run a topic-based curriculum because we can feed things into it. But again, we've gone back to look at the rigour behind that and actually how that progresses through school, so the children get a chance to retrieve knowledge, to build upon what their previous learning was, and so on and so on. But we definitely didn't go down a bought curriculum line, nor did we go down the line of let's throw it all out and start from somewhere up here. We absolutely took what was good about the current curriculum, and we thought about where we'd like it to be in the context of the new framework as well as the context of our school, and actually we came up with what was really important for our children to thread throughout every subject, in every area, in all year groups, so that we knew that by the time they left us, they'd be what we wanted them to be as a well-rounded child, really, rather than just we've got them there in maths and English. So it's been a really interesting year and a really good year, giving us a chance to go back to curriculum and get into the nitty-gritty. I think it's brought staff together and given them a greater understanding about what we mean by curriculum. Because I think when we started talking about it, it was funny that our staff thought mainly it was about wider curriculum. When you talk about the curriculum, you talk about history, geography, science. Well, actually, no. We're talking about the curriculum as in what are we providing as a whole. So yeah, it's been really interesting, but we certainly didn't throw it all out, and we didn't choose to go with a pre-designed one purely because of the contents of our school, and there were 3 key elements we really wanted to drive through all areas of our curriculum. So that's how we approached it.
I'd love to come to your school.
Very welcome. Anytime. Just give me a warning.
It's really, yeah, sure. Half a day. No, I mean, the thing is that very few schools, in fact, I'm going to put it out here now, I don't think any school in the country buys a whole curriculum, right? It's probably almost impossible. I think there are some that have a kind of international curriculum, but they don't buy the whole thing. Some schools will say there's no point in reinventing the wheel in maths, and therefore we'll have this maths curriculum. And then when you get down to subjects, some people will buy schemes and this that. What we didn't want to do with the framework was say, no, you can't do that. Yeah, we wanted to make sure that it was pluralistic in terms of how schools can use what they've got, think about what could be improved, develop things, etc., etc. So that it's very purposefully worded about adopting or developing, and the adoption also is about, for example, schools in multi-academy trust, for example. So, you know, it would be weird if we were to come in and say, no, you've got to develop your curriculum, when actually schools have been working together in a trust to develop the curriculum, and that they all happen to do roughly the same thing, because that's not our job to say, no, you shouldn't do that, you should all individually develop your curriculum. So it's the approach which is trying to make sure that schools do the right thing for their children, that they think about their own resourcing, they think about their own capacity, because you know what, go back to those small schools, the idea that you are, you know, if it's a 2-teacher school and you are going to develop from scratch every bit of the curriculum is nuts. It's not going to, you know, it's too much work. So actually those schools probably will go and buy a maths curriculum or a history curriculum or you know. So it's trying to do those things, but of course the important part about it is how it's then threaded together, and then how it's conceived and what you're trying to achieve with it. And that's not about intent statements and vision statements and all that kind of stuff. It's actually about going really practically, like Nicola was saying, step back from it. What do you want your children to achieve? What do you want them to know, be able to do at key points? And when they leave us, what do we want the children from our school to be able to go on and do next? It's that kind of thing, really.
Okay. We are kind of running out of time, so I've got 2 questions that are kind of similar. I'm going to go with Sean first, because we were talking about myth busting earlier. So, you know, what do you think is at present the biggest misconception about Ofsted that teachers often have?
Crikey. Well, I think different teachers have different misconceptions, different schools have different misconceptions. I suspect that much of the stuff that's come out in the last 3 weeks about people being frightened, fearful, scared of deep dives are those that have not gone through it. Now, I have no doubt that there will be schools out there who and teachers have done the deep dives and thought, oh my gosh, I don't know, that was terrible. I understand that. But most of the fear that's being generated from people who haven't gone through the process. Because we did 200 or 300 pilots or something, but actually there are nearly 22,000 schools in the country, so very, very small percentage of them. So I think probably the current misconception is that, you know, we want to come in, well, part of the misconception always about Ofsted is that we're hell-bent on putting schools down. Yeah? The numbers
made a judgment before.
Or we made a judgment before we've come in. The numbers just don't back that up. You know, 86% of schools are good or better. So actually it isn't backed up by us wanting to go and do schools down. So I think that's probably the misconception, but the idea currently that, you know, the deep dives are something to be fearful for and they're going to drive loads and loads of workload, I think people just need to step back from that and think, what am I here to do? I'm here to teach children. To teach children over time, you need to plan out what the curriculum looks like as a team and to work together to do that. And if people just put that in perspective, think, we've already been doing this, you know, we can improve it, and no great school, no good school sits on their curriculum and just lets it ossify anyway. It's always a bit of a process development.
Brilliant. And finally then, what would be your best advice to someone who is about to go through the new Ofsted Framework inspection?
So I think the best advice I'd have for head teachers is to make sure that you've got your self-evaluation in your head, because I didn't in that pre-inspection phone call, and so that's a lesson I learned, I think. So make sure you're very clear about your self-evaluation and that it's somewhere to hand when that phone call comes in. I think it's not to panic, and from our experience it was most definitely a joint effort. Yes, you always feel the pressure when Ofsted come in, you know, and everyone's trying to be on their very best behaviour. But actually, you know, they were personable and they actually supported us through those processes and really made it it felt like a joint effort. There is more pressure on staff in the fact that they are then, you know, going to do deep dives with the inspectors. And so I think as a head teacher, my biggest thing would be to say that realistically, apart from, you know, the odd conversation every now and again, I was pretty much redundant, but it was my job then to support my staff. And I think that's where my job became a little bit more apparent as to actually making sure they were okay, they felt confident in what they were doing. So that's really my advice, is just...
So to summarise
shouldn't feel they can't be there for those teachers and sit with them, because actually in a small school it's a team effort.
Yeah.
So the idea of putting all of the history curriculum onto one person actually is not right anyway. You've got to work together. So there's no problem about there being a head teacher being with that and supporting and taking on.
Because everybody designs the curriculum together, don't they, in the
Yeah.
school, and then
Yeah, and
you've got
we
to all
supported
share
each other, so we kind of had two of us in each. It was a positive experience, and one that we were nervous about, but was positive.
Well, hopefully that's good for everyone to hear. Thank you so much for your time, both of you, for travelling all this way with horrendous traffic as well. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.